All right. Cool. So I guess I'll start real fast with a little bit of background on myself. I entered the Bitcoin industry, back when I started, 2013. And then in 2014, I launched a company called Bitwage. Bitwage is an international payroll and invoicing company that moves money faster and cheaper to bank accounts across borders. That is built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. We've got over 20,000 users and have performed over $30 million in transactions. Then in 2015, I started writing for Forbes about once or twice a month on all things Bitcoin blockchain related. And finally, in 2017, we released our Bitwage that leverages the IT freelance customers of Bitwage to provide front-end, back-end blockchain development and ICO development for companies in various countries. So while a lot of this might be quite interesting to talk about in detail, today we're here to talk about blockchain and the internet. And so before our next two speakers come up to really talk about what exactly is happening, I'm going to give a little bit of introduction to blockchain for those that maybe don't know it. And this little clicker doesn't work very well, so. Why is it that it's not so easy to just send money directly from my phone to your phone, right? Why can't I just send money? You can send a white paper, you can send a video, all sorts of this kind of data on the internet, but you can't send money. The reason is because of something called the double spending problem. So when I'm sending you, let's say, a white paper, I'm actually creating a copy of that white paper and sending you the copy, but I maintain the original version of this. And this is all fine and dandy for things like white paper, but if you think about like a concert ticket, if I send you a concert ticket and I still have a copy, I could sell it to someone else. And as a result, you don't know that when you go to the concert venue, whether or not you'll be able to get it. This is a big problem. You'll never actually know that you have access to this concert until you get to it. When you think about this when it comes to money, if you could just create a copy of money and send it to someone else, you have an infinite inflation rate. You have €1 and it can literally represent an entire economy. So it doesn't work. So how do we solve the double spending problem when it comes to online transactions? Through trusted third-party intermediaries, like the banks. And you know, this is all good. It makes it so that when I send money from me to you, you can be assured that the money is out of my account and in yours. And we trust the banks because they have brands, because they're regulated. But there are a few risks associated with it, which are risks of centralization risks when it comes to banks. The three main risks, two of them have to do with the fact that it's hard to move your money from one of your accounts to another account, so the bank will charge high fees and delay the transaction. There's another risk that you're taking, which is credit risk. Because you're holding your money in a third-party institution, this institution is going to loan your money out. And again, that's all fine and dandy, except when this credit risk is miscalculated on a macro level by all banks, right? And that led to the subprime mortgage crisis or recession in 2008. And it was during this global recession that there was an inspiration born and the release of a white paper by a man named Satoshi Nakamoto, a way to hold your money digitally without relying on third parties, without centralization. It was described as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, otherwise known as Bitcoin. How did he achieve this? How did he solve the double spending problem? Well, essentially, he decentralized the data processing and storage, the currency processing and storage, and had it all transparently held on a highly secure public ledger. The data that was processed and storage would be known as Bitcoin, and the highly secure public ledger for everyone to see, the blockchain. And this led to explosive industry growth, inspiring industries like the ICO industry, smart contracts, decentralized apps, various cryptocurrencies, permission blockchain environments, which we talked about more later, and just Bitcoin itself, grew to a $250 billion market cap. But it's right here where things really get interesting. In 2014, at the same time I started my company, this is when enterprises really started to look at Bitcoin and blockchain technology. How can we use this technology for ourselves? And it's around this time that you start seeing Jamie Dimon come out saying Bitcoin is, it's useless, but blockchain is really the valuable technology. And some people now I think disagree with that. But anyways, what ended up happening is people by the end of 2015 started to describe blockchain as the web of trust, or more technically a distributed database. You have companies like R3CEV, who will have 40 institutions plus by the end of 2015, with companies like Goldman Sachs. You also had Hyperledger coming out, partnering with the Linux Foundation and IBM. So what were the attributes that had people start considering this technology the web of trust? And in order to understand that, we really have to go back and do the same exercise that these enterprises did in 2014, which is understand how Bitcoin, the most successful blockchain, works. So the easiest way to think about Bitcoin is that it's digital gold. You can hold it, you don't have to rely on a third party. It's scarce, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. And it's not created by a government, it's separated from government. So this is sort of the easy way to think about it, but let's go with the hard way. The hard way is a borderless, transnational, open system of access for financial payments and trust that enables permissionless innovation with high resistance to censorship, coercion, and geopolitical manipulation. Okay, it's a big mouthful. What does it all mean? Borderless and transnational. The Bitcoin blockchain doesn't really care who you are or where you live. As long as you have access to the internet, you can interact. You can be in Chile, you can be in China, you can be in France, you can be in Morocco. It doesn't matter your race, your ethnicity, your economic class. Open system of access for financial payments and trust. It's incredibly transparent. And while my name is not on the blockchain, my location is not on the blockchain, when I send money from me to you, you're going to see the transaction, how much I sent, who I sent it to, where the wallet that I sent it from, and if you keep track of all that, you can also see how much money is in all of the wallets. So it's incredibly open, incredibly transparent, and in doing so, it creates an environment where you can actually trust when I send money to you that I no longer have that money and I can't double spend it, so long as you can trust the ledger. I'll get into that later. Enables permissionless innovation. So now you have access to a digital currency that you don't need to ask permission to experiment with. You don't have to ask permission for a financial institution. And as a result, you see a lot of innovation in foreign exchange, international payments, micropayments, currency storage, and also the inspiration for a brand new industry built around smart contracts. And if you really think about the ultimate outcome of smart contracts that people talk about, people will talk about this concept of the decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. And the concept is you have a company with no employees, no management, and no leadership at all. The company runs on its own, and it's able to conduct commerce through smart contracts. A smart contract, just to define that, is essentially you have a contract that is immutable. anyone can see it and know what inputs will cause what outputs. Sorry, a little second. Cause what outputs. And so, as a result, when certain data comes in, you're able to have certain payments go to certain third parties. DAOs are not quite ready. We've seen DAOs happen. We've seen DAOs fail. But what is ready is this concept called the initial coin offering. Smart contracts are powering the initial coin offering right now, which is a $3.5 billion market. With high resistance to censorship, coercion, and geopolitical manipulation. So there's two main values that are happening with this. One is that you're controlling your money, and two is that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. Why is this valuable? Well, it's important to have a choice. Oh, thank you. So it's important to have a choice on how to control your money, so that now you're able to actually size up your risk, the credit risk that you might take of holding your money in a bank versus holding it on your own. Bank secures it on a day-to-day basis, but is loaning out your money, so you should be considering that. But there's another area to think about, which is control of the money supply creation. And in the US and in Europe, it's totally fine. Our governments follow the rule of law. We can trust these governments. But it's in places like Venezuela, oh nice work, places like Venezuela, where really you see that governments are not able to responsibly manage the money supply. So in Venezuela, you see that in January 2016, there was 6.3 Venezuelan bolivar rate, and the black market rate was 800 Venezuelan bolivars to the dollar. So there's a big spread in the actual rate versus the official rate. But that's not really the crazy part, because just last week, you've seen a black market rate of 80,000 Venezuelan bolivar to the dollar. So this is crazy hyperinflation. And so it's in countries like this where you realize that separating the money supply, the money creation from the government, for you as a user, can actually provide a lot of value. It's a store of value. Okay, so now we went over why people are interested in Bitcoin. But let's think about how it works. There are 5 main stakeholders. Some people will argue that that they should be described differently, but there's miners, nodes, core developers, applications, and users. On the bottom, you have the people who actually provide value to a blockchain. But at the top, you have the infrastructure. So I'm going to talk about the infrastructure, the miners and the nodes. So with a traditional transaction, when I'm sending money from me to you, you're going to have a bank. It's going to process it. It's going to process your transactions, and it's going to accept your transactions. All done in the same place. It's trusted because of reputation and regulation. But with Bitcoin transaction, you actually distribute this processing to all the miners in a network and all the nodes. So processing nodes, accepting transactions, processing transactions, miners, accepting transactions, nodes. And instead of having to trust these people to act in good faith, it's built trustlessly. It's built in a way where if a miner tries to act off, if a node tries to act off, or if me trying to send money to you, it tries to work against you, you don't have to worry about it. It's built so that you don't have to trust that I'm acting in good faith through technical and economic incentives. So in order for a transaction to be trustworthy at all, the receiver needs to know that the sender sent the money. And the receiver needs to know that the sender cannot double spend. So to solve the first part, we have public-private key cryptography. It's a little bit more technical now, but essentially you have a private key, public key. You can generate a public key with a private key. And the way the transaction works is I take your public key and I create a transaction sending money to it, and then I sign it with my private key. And what you receive is a signed transaction, which you can associate to my public key that I can generate through my private key. So to abstract that a little bit, make it easier to understand, think of a private key as a debit card and PIN, right? You don't want to share the debit card and PIN with anyone, because then they can send you money. Or they can spend your money. But if you are sending, but with a public key, you can think of this as an IBAN number, right? You can share an IBAN number with anyone, then they can send you their money, and they can know that the money came from you. They're unable to send you money with a public key. But you still have double spend. I can digitally sign any transaction I want. I can digitally sign 2 transactions at the same time and send them through the network. How can you know which one is the correct one? Well, this is where nodes and miners come in. Nodes, they do 3 things, basically. They accept transactions. They enforce the rules of what is an acceptable transaction. And then they maintain all of the transactions in the ledger and broadcast them. A ledger which is called a blockchain. Anyone can become a node. All you have to do is run software, typically written by core developers. And you could be anywhere in the world. You could be in China, France, Morocco, whatever. But how do they know that you're not doing double spend? So the answer is that they require, before they accept any transaction, for there to be computation spent, work spent, some sort of proof of work on the transaction before they accept it. And to really dig into how this proof of work actually happens, we need to talk about miners. So what miners are doing is they take transactions, they put them into a block of transactions, they verify those transactions have not been in a previous block that's already in the ledger of the blockchain. And then they will compete to solve an algorithm that requires computational power. If they are the first one to solve the algorithm, they create a block, they're able to put their block of transactions onto the blockchain, and they're essentially cryptographically chaining this block to the previous block, hence the name blockchain. So to try and put this into an example to understand a little bit more, if I am a bad actor, and I'm trying to send you money, I'm trying to double spend you, before I could just create a bad transaction, two transactions that are bad. But now, what's actually happening is when I send a transaction, 2 transactions, I can only double spend up until the next block is found. And then once that block is found, I'm unable to double spend that transaction. And that transaction happens once every 10 minutes. What? Now, there is an attack where essentially what I could do is I can send you a transaction. That transaction gets mined. There's a new block. But I am on the side mining a second version of the blockchain for my transaction, but where I double spend a transaction. And the nodes essentially will accept the longest chain. So if I can grow my chain longer than the non-double spent chain, then you will beat the market. But the market that you're trying to beat right now is a $3.5 billion market that is running 12 million terahashes per second. What does that mean? It's not a hash, it's not a kilohash, it's not a mega hash, it's not a gigahash, it's not even a terahash. It's 12 million terahashes per second that requires billions of dollars to achieve. So in order to essentially mine 2 blocks at a rate faster than 1 block against this entire network would require billions of dollars to maintain. And thus, this is the security of the network. So then you might be thinking, okay, why are people spending billions of dollars to spend computational power? And the answer is a Bitcoin reward. If you find a block and you send it out to the entire network, then as a result, you get the next Bitcoin, you get the next block of Bitcoin, and you get all the fees for the Bitcoin transactions. Okay, so in summary, what's been created through this combination of nodes and miners, we've been able to solve the double spending problem. You know, it's kind of complex to understand. But anyways, we've been able to develop a peer-to-peer digital currency where you can send money without having to go through a third party. You have an immutable public database for everyone to see. You have transactions that are traceable to the origin or the creation of those coins. And you have transactional timestamps for each block that happens every 10 minutes to approximately. So if we go into the enterprise level, and you think about currency and money, and you abstract that to a layer where you say data, because it's all data at the end of the day. Now you're starting to get into the enterprise territory. And there's 4 attributes that enterprises are looking to leverage in the blockchain. Proof of authenticity, which is the proof of a piece of data back to its inception. An example of this is an RFID chip on a piece of clothing to prove that a piece of clothing is real and legitimate. Data notarization, a little bit more complex. It combines timestamping and hashing. So with a hash, you can hash any piece of data. Because it's deterministic, you always get the same output for the same input. And you cannot get the same output with any different input. So as a result, if you combine that with a timestamp on the blockchain, you're able to prove that a piece of data was exactly as it was at a given time. So the idea is you can replace something like signatures, notarized signatures. Data aggregation is the idea of sharing data on a public database for everyone to see, requires consensus for an upgrade to occur. And if you combine that with data notarization, then the result is you have easier audits. You have easier financial audits, business process audits, supply chain audits, and then asset settlement, which is moving money directly from me to you without a third party. And this is really where the ICO world is. And they're trying to digitize random things like loyalty points, discounts. They're trying to digitize things like membership, and also potential profit share of future earnings. So in conclusion, Bitcoin is built on an open, public, permissionless blockchain infrastructure, whereas enterprises are trying to leverage some of these advantages of Bitcoin, but in a controlled, permission environment. And so I guess from here, I'll let the other speakers sort of explain what exactly is going on in the enterprise environment. Any questions? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Regarding the decentralization and miners, I know that there are kind of centralization with miners, with pool. So what happens if the concentration of miners is too high and we tend to a kind of centralization of the network?
Okay, yeah, so this is actually where the scaling debate is focused. I won't go too deep into that. But essentially, this is why you have these 2 different stakeholders, the miners and the nodes. Okay, so if you have mining centralization, the worst thing that you can have is censorship. So people can stop your transactions from happening. So a miner would be able to do that, but they can't actually change the rules of the protocol. That would require the centralization of the nodes. The nodes, if they don't like how the miners are acting, can actually choose to reject transactions, certain types of transactions that miners are pushing forward. And this is actually what happened recently with, in August of 2017. There were 2 forks that happened, a user-activated soft fork and a user-activated hard fork. Fork meaning, basically soft fork is an upgrade to the protocol that's backwards compatible, and a hard fork is an upgrade to the protocol that is not backwards compatible. And it basically, in one scenario, you have the soft fork that says, we need to ensure that nodes continue to exist so that we can counter any centralization risk of miners. And the other side essentially said, we can trust miners because they're like regular corporations, they'll have brands, they'll get regulated. And we'll be able to trust these institutions in the future. We just need a scaling solution that works today that doesn't care about the nodes. So right now, what's actually happening is that in Bitcoin, BTC, you have a scalability solution that is taking into account the centralization of miners by allowing more nodes to exist to be able to counter the centralization that's there.
As a complement to your answer, maybe you may also remember a few months ago, maybe a year ago, there was a short period of time where miners were too concentrated and they immediately split because of the fear of the value of the Bitcoin dropping because of their excessive power. So game theory is going to help us as well.
I think you're talking about Ghash, right? Or I think that was the mining pool. That was pretty big about 2 years ago. Yeah, so yeah, that's if you assume that there's good actors, but the miners can also act not be good actors to some degree, and in that case they might not actually split up. They might just continue to do what they're doing. Not to say that the current miners are good or bad actors, but it's less trustless in that environment, and you would have to trust that the miners would end up splitting up. And I guess the idea is that you might think that in Bitcoin, because the centralization won't have as much control, it won't matter as much. Versus in Bitcoin Cash, the centralization actually can have power for you to essentially change what's happening. But maybe the miners aren't good actors. Just profit maximize it.
Could Bitcoin switch to a proof of stake system, or is that just not possible? Is that,
well, there's different camps of belief around this, but some of the other people would be better. Jan, actually speaking after me, would be better to answer this question than myself, which is there's an attack with proof of stake called nothing at stake attack, and it has to do with the fact that your security is based off of resources that are internal to the system. Versus what's happening with Bitcoin with proof of work, the resources are external to the system, and as a result, it's harder to attack it. So it's actually, in my mind, the energy that's used is security to the system, because you have to replicate that energy, you have to replicate all the money spent on that in order to break the system.
Thanks.
Okay, so I don't think, maybe we don't have enough time for more questions, but let's take a break, because I think Jan, who's over here, is going to talk a lot about this other interesting content. And we'll take a 10-minute break, 15-minute break before getting to him. And you can ask me any questions you want, I guess, during that break. Yeah, thank you guys.